and I think that they should be paid more. So, you know, how you solve the social housing, or you invest in shared housing or something like that, I don't know.
Gary, when you've got a salary which is incredibly stretched in a place like Auckland, and you go to Dunedin where the average house price is $370,000, not $1.2 million, I suppose you ask, why wouldn't you?
Well, you see, I think in the past, in our history, we have had to face dilemmas like this, and we've addressed it. When they couldn't get teachers to go into the country service, they got a special allowance in the past. And I actually think that in Auckland, the government needs to look at when a student is in Auckland, has become a teacher, then their student debt should be paid off for every year that they are in teaching. And the other thing that I think we've got to think differently about our housing. If you think about the airspace above a school, and you think about the space above every classroom and all that, you could actually put housing above that as well. And so we could actually invest in land that we already own, so we don't have to pay for the land, and we build above the school, and that can provide housing for affordable housing for our teachers.
I think
and we
some
need to
teachers would like to escape the school, though,
I'm sure that.
You know,
Yeah.
if it was cheap enough, maybe.
Yeah, I know. I mean, we need to do these things to actually, maybe you can live in above another school.
Yeah, right, okay, yeah.
Well, you're talking about looking at all options, aren't you? Because I saw it very interesting. Actually, it was on Name Check. It was on Sunday, TVNZ, and there was that very solution they built. Actually, quite a stylish apartment above a car park, so the cars park underneath.
Yeah.
And okay, it was supposed to be a temporary solution, but it was a solution of a sort.
Yeah, we need to be actually thinking about the land that isn't being used, and that's often called air. You know, the space above a building, why are we wasting it?
Now, before you both go, one more story here I want to get your viewpoint on. Princess Diana's sons were confused by the public outpouring of grief at her death. And this is one of the revelations in a BBC documentary about the late Princess of Wales. They have a point: you didn't know her. I just want to ask you both, what do you make of public grief? Genuine, or is it genuine, or is it a chance for people to get on an emotional high of some sort? What do you reckon, Catherine?
Oh, I think combination of both. I think, you know, the extent at which you let it go on would dictate as to whether you're using it for yourself or actually you have genuine feelings about it. I think, you know, we can never actually know. I remember there was a great quote, James Taylor, the songwriter, some guy yelled out at the concert, "I love you, man," and James said, "It helps not to know me." And so, you know, I think we do not know celebrities. They are not our friends. They are not people that we actually genuinely love. But we can mourn them, you know, we can... You know, it can tap something in us. So I wouldn't decry anybody's grief at somebody dying. Yeah.
I don't know, Gary, because I've got a general law on Twitter that I don't tend to sort of go, you know, R.I.P. David Bowie, because I feel I didn't know him. You know, that's my little rule. What I mean, do you buy into some sort of genuine grief for these famous people?
Oh yes, I think they give us a sense of hope, and I think that hope is something that is inside all of us. And if somebody gave us hope. I understand these two boys, they were 12 and 15, and, you know, they were just young kids, really, and it was a surprise to them. It was pretty special.
Right. Gary Moore and Catherine Robinson, thank you very much for being on the panel.
Kia ora everyone, I'm Rowan Quinn and for John Campbell, and on behalf of our team, welcome to Checkpoint on RNZ National. Tonight, the CEO of the Northland DHB fires a warning shot to the Ministry of Health. Nick Chamberlain says the government's population-based funding is not working for Northland, and the board won't sign off on a projected $7.5 million deficit until the DHB gets more funding. The Minister, Jonathan Coleman, joins us live to respond. Also tonight, lengthy prison sentences for two men involved in the country's largest ever cocaine bust. And the Māori Party calls for Mike Hosking to be dumped from his role as TVNZ's election debate moderator.
RNZ News at 5. Kia ora, good afternoon. Ko Katrina Batanaho. Northland's DHB's chief executive said his board will be more than $7 million in deficit this year and won't be able to submit its annual report to the Ministry of Health. In a frank letter to the DHB's staff, Nick Chamberlain says the board doesn't get enough money because the ministry's population-based funding model is flawed. He says it's missed out on $30 million in the past 3 years and it's struggling to care for one of the highest needs populations in the country. The Ministry of Health says Northland's funding has increased by almost 5% each year over the past 3 years, more than any other DHB in the country. The Māori Party says comments by TVNZ's Mike Hosking about the Māori role have caused irreparable damage to its campaign. During a discussion on 7 Sharp last night, Hosking told his co-host she couldn't vote for the Māori Party as she's not on the Māori roll. Under MMP, any voter can give their party vote to the Māori Party. Its president, Tukororangi Morgan, says Hosking has misled voters with his comments and he's laid a complaint with the Electoral Commission and TVNZ.
We're also conveying our deep-seated disappointment and concern that someone of the stature of Mike Hoskins, who is a well-known radio and television presenter, can make such a blunder at this time during the campaign.
Tukororangi Morgan of the Māori Party. TVNZ says it accepts Mike Hosking's comments were wrong and it'll make a clarification on tonight's show. The State Services Commission is investigating after the National Party's campaign slogan featured in a presentation at Treasury yesterday. Commission rules require government departments to stay clear of party politics in the run-up to a general election. The slogan, "Delivering for New Zealanders," appeared during the Finance Minister's slideshow during the pre-election fiscal update. The National Party leader Bill English says the slogan featured in the May budget.
Delivering for New Zealanders was the tagline of the 2017 budget. So it's right through the budget material, which was certainly a government announcement. So the preview is essentially a budget process, and the Treasury run it, and it looks like the budget material. So SSC can have a look at it. Quite happy to take their advice.
The National Party leader Bill English. The 2 men who helped a drug syndicate to bring 35 kilograms of cocaine into the country had buyers lined up for the Class A drug. The interception by customs is the largest single shipment, the previous highest being just 6 kilograms. Edward Gay reports.
Today, Ronald Cook Sr. was jailed for 17 years and 9 months and Agustin Suarez for 19 years and 9 months. The court heard how the drugs were smuggled in inside a bronze horsehead statue, but customs detected the drugs and replaced them with flour. The 2 men met a prospective buyer in the Crown Plaza Hotel, but panicked when they found a tracking device inside one of the packages. The men also had a second buyer lined up, but tried to flee the country before they could meet him. I Tāmaki Makoto ko Edward Gay aho.
Young people in Dunedin are being urged to get the MMR vaccine if they can't remember if they're fully immunised against mumps. The city is experiencing a mumps outbreak with 12 confirmed cases, most of them notified in the past 10 days. Mumps is a highly infectious viral illness spread in the same way as colds and flu and can cause serious lasting problems. A medical officer of health, Naomi Goff, says most of the cases in Dunedin appear to be connected to young people.
If they are not sure whether they're immune to mumps, they're encouraged to get vaccinated. The MMR vaccine is free to anyone who needs it. If people are unsure whether they've had 2 or not, there's no harm in getting a 3rd.
Dr. Naomi Goff. The Automobile Association says upping the speed limits on some major roads is well overdue. The government has confirmed motorists will be able to travel at 110 kilometres per hour on 7 major roads before the end of the year. They include the Tauranga Eastern Link and parts of the Waikato Expressway, and roads in Kapiti and Christchurch are tipped for faster limits. The AA's General Manager of Motoring, Mike Noon, says since 2014, 79% of the association's members have wanted increased limits on high-quality roads.
They're divided, they're multi-lane, they've got runoffs, they've got wide lanes, they've got good delineation. They don't have things like trees and poles and ditches along the sides of them. These are roads which are designed for a safe operating speed of 110.
Mike Noon from the AA. It's 5 past 5. Sport, and the All Blacks hooker Dane Coles admits he's apprehensive about returning to Test rugby. Coles will pay his 50th Test for the All Blacks when he takes the field against Australia in Dunedin on Saturday night. His last Test was 9 months ago, with injury and concussion having blighted his Super Rugby season.
There's always a bit of fear, that's just natural, but it's just not letting that fear control you. When I'm out there, like training or doing contact, I'm not thinking about my head, I'm just making a tackle, throwing a line out. Yeah, I think that's just what I've learned is, look, don't let it control you, and once I'm in the moment doing things, I'm just doing my job and playing footy.
Dane Coles. The All Blacks have been forced to make a change to the starting 15. They named this morning, with prop Owen Franks ruled out with a hamstring injury. He's been replaced by the Chiefs prop Nepa Laulala. Meanwhile, the Wallabies have made 3 changes to their starting 15 for the Test, and New Zealand Rugby will also honour the late Sir Colin Meads at the match. The All Blacks lock, Sam Whitelock, who shares the number 5 jersey with Sir Colin, will give his playing jersey to the Meads family, while a moment's silence will also be observed before the match. New Zealand's premier canoe sprinter Lisa Carrington begins her busiest World Championships yet when she takes to the water in the Czech Republic tonight. The double Rio Olympic medalist will compete in her favoured K1 200 and 500 events, as well as the K2 500 and K4 500. She could potentially compete 12 times over 4 days, but is confident her recent training in Europe has prepared her well. That's the news.
Drug-using WINS guests infuriate Motelia.
Well, it makes me bloody angry. A lot of these people just seem to be able to do whatever they like and go and wreck, and they think it's their money.
What do young voters want?
What I think of voting is just voting for a park I'm probably never going to play on. Just give us a reason.
Mining protests in Karangahake Gorge.
Yeah, there's 8 people who are standing their ground and risking arrest.
Are you're willing to be arrested too for this?
Not me, not today.
Arresting news. Guy and Aspinall and Susie Ferguson, morning reports, weekdays from 6.
And then on 9 to noon, remembering New Zealand's original Antarctic pioneers, a special gathering of their descendants honours their contributions. And after 10, a wild past and a sober present. Jenny Valentish on her research into women and substance abuse. Join me, Lynn Freeman, in for Catherine Ryan on 9 to noon after Morning Report on RNZ National.
Met service weather through to midnight tomorrow. Northland, a few showers mainly in the north and east. Auckland and Coromandel Peninsula, also Taranaki, Kapiti and Wellington. Fine, apart from a few cloudy areas and isolated showers. For the remainder of the North Island, also Nelson, Marlborough, Canterbury, North Otago and Dunedin. Mostly fine, isolated showers about Bay of Plenty, Waikato, Taupo and northern Gisborne tomorrow. Bulla and Westland, cloudy periods with a few showers. Fiordland and Stewart Island, periods of rain, possibly heavy about Fiordland. For the remainder of Southland, cloudy periods and scattered rain. Central Otago and Clutha, high cloud increasing with a few spots of rain tomorrow. And for the Chatham Islands, occasional showers. It's exactly 5:08 and you're listening to Checkpoint.
Thanks, Katrina. Good evening. I'm Rowan Quinn in here on Checkpoint for John Campbell. And we begin tonight with a standoff between the Northland DHB and the Ministry of Health. It's the latest DHB to say it doesn't have enough money to look after the health of its population. In a strongly worded 3-page letter to staff today, Northland DHB CEO Nick Chamberlain warns of a projected $7.5 million deficit for the next financial year and says the board won't be submitting its budget or annual plan to the ministry until it receives more funding. The DHB covers the population from Mangawhai, just below Whangarei, to Te Hapua in the far north. It's one of the poorest DHBs in the country with the highest needs. But as Bridget Burke explains, other DHBs are struggling to live within their means.
In his 3-page letter, Mr Chamberlain told more than 2,500 staff the government's population-based funding model is not working for Northland and it has missed out on almost $30 million in the past 3 years. He says, after writing twice to the Ministry of Health asking for it to remove its funding cap, the board will not sign off on its projected $7.5 million deficit without extra funding. Mr Chamberlain says as a consequence his DHB has not submitted its budget or annual plan to the ministry. Mr Chamberlain says after the 2013 census, the DHB realised there were thousands more people living in its area than it had previously thought. But because there is a cap on how much more funding the board can receive each year, it is not yet funded for its full population. And, he adds, this situation has forced the DHB to focus on the health of the majority of the population rather than the highest need patients in communities like those living in rural areas or in poverty. His letter pleads with staff to make savings where they can and says the board has written to the Ministry of Health asking it to give the people of Northland the money they need. The Health Minister, Jonathan Coleman, has made no secret of the fact he expects all 20 DHBs to meet budget. Here he is, speaking with John Campbell on Checkpoint about DHB deficits less than a fortnight ago.
Oh, look, they definitely have to strive to live within their means, no question about that. We can't have the deficits absolutely blowing out.
Is the deficit blowing out? You said that it was somewhere between 50 and 100 million. The latest figure I have is 99 million.
It's increasing, but it's not near the level of what it was at the end of 2008, where it was 150 million. But look, without continued discipline, you know, those things can get out of hand.
Earlier this week, it was revealed Canterbury DHB alone was forecasting a $54 million deficit in its draft annual plan for the 2017-18 year. Southern DHB has a forecast deficit of $14 million. And tonight, Checkpoint can reveal the Waikato DHB is vowing to present a break-even budget, despite its first working showing a hefty deficit.
I think if you cast it any year, we would have a deficit in our first workings, and then we have to work through solutions.
Right, so the first workings were showing what sort of a deficit in the ballpark of 30 million?
Yes.
So 30 million deficit?
32, I think, would have been the figure.
Bob Simcock is the chair of the Waikato DHB.
Our intention is to deliver a break-even budget to the government. Clearly, our initial work through the budget identifies significant pressures, but we will be presenting a break-even budget. Checkpoint
understands Waikato, Northland and Auckland DHBs are the only 3 of the 20 DHBs yet to file their draft annual plans for the 2017-18 year. Details of other forecasts remain confidential. Mr Simcock says although it will be challenging, the Waikato DHB knows which areas it can target to manage the deficit to a break-even position.
We believe there are some significant efficiencies needed to be achieved in our theatres. I don't think that we are performing as effectively as some other DHBs, so we need to get some work done with that, which we're doing urgently. We also have to look at how we are working with primary care to try to stop some of the acute demand that's coming in the front door. So those would be the major things, but there are a whole range of small things that would run right through the organisation.
He told Checkpoint it isn't a case of fat trimming.
So at the moment we are contracting out a lot of our electives because our theatres are fully occupied with acute. But when we look at our performance compared with some other organisations, we believe that we can deliver more activity in our theatres than we currently are.
In February, Treasury released its view of DHB financial performances up to the last complete financial year. It uses green, amber and red to measure performance. Green means no particular concerns, amber means some concerns, red means concerns. Of the 20 DHBs, 11 are amber or red. These include Canterbury and Waikato, whom we've already mentioned, Capital and Coast, Hutt, Lakes, South Canterbury, Southern, Tairāwhiti, Taranaki, Wairarapa and the West Coast. The Waikato DHB was categorised as amber with issues funding asset maintenance and repairs. Mr Simcock says his discussions with the ministry have been frank.
There was a clear indication that we're expected to meet our normal obligations, which is to live within our means.
The Ministry of Health's Group Manager for Systems Outcomes, Sam Kunowski, says where draft annual plans do not meet either financial or non-financial expectations, the ministry continues to engage with DHBs to agree the final plans. For Checkpoint, Bridget Burke.
And in response to the Northland DHB's concerns about population-based funding, the Ministry of Health says its formula uses information from Statistics New Zealand for their estimates. The Group Manager for System Outcomes, Sam Kunowski, says the population-based funding formula was recently reviewed to ensure it remained a fair and equitable way of distributing funding to the DHBs. And as a result, a number of minor changes were made. He says Northland's funding growth has increased by an average of 4.82% over the last 3 years, the largest increase out of all the DHBs. And the Northland DHB CEO, Nick Chamberlain, declined to be interviewed, but the Minister of Health, Jonathan Coleman, is currently driving and will join us live after 6 o'clock tonight. Well, it had all the makings of a movie. A dire Mount Monty encrusted horse head stuffed with 35 kilometres of cocaine and characters with nicknames like the Godfather, the Artist and the Technician. But today it became all too real for Agustin Suarez, jailed for 19 years 9 months, and Ronald Cook Sr. jailed for 17 years and 9 months. The pair were involved in the country's largest ever importation of cocaine and have today received New Zealand's longest sentences for cocaine supply. Our Auckland court reporter Edward Gay filed this report.
Father of 6 Ronald Cook Sr. had just spent his life savings on a family home in Hawaii, but it was run down and needed a new roof. Justice Cates said the $50,000 he was promised by Agustin Suarez to help with a cocaine deal on the other side of the Pacific Ocean was very attractive. A man known as the Godfather in Mexico seems to have been the mastermind behind the plan. The 35 1-kilogram packages of cocaine were hidden by a man known as the Artist inside a horsehead statue, but Justice Cates said the 330 kg bronze head from Mexico was intercepted by customs in New Zealand.
They discovered the concealed cocaine and replaced 34 of the packages with packages containing flour.
The 35th package had a wire in it, allowing customs to track the whereabouts of the drugs that police estimate could have had a street value of up to $14 million. Cook and Suarez arrived in the country and organised for the head to be moved to a house in Te Aratu, but left the country a short time later in an effort to make sure they were not being watched. A month later, they were back to claim their prize.
Covert recording devices in the garage recorded their attempts to cut through the base of the horsehead sculpture.
Known as the Technician, Cook Sr. took over an hour using an angle grinder and a crowbar to break into the head. They had a buyer named Suzuki lined up. They met with another buyer named Henry Anchondo at the Crown Plaza in central Auckland. Anchondo wanted to buy 5 kilograms of the drug. Once inside a hotel room, Anchondo queried one of the packages. It happened to be the one with the tracking device inside. When Anchondo cut it open, he spotted the wire.
Not surprisingly, all 3 men panicked at that point. Mr. Suarez asked Mr. Anchondo to take the other 4 packages with him, but he refused to do so. Mr. Anchondo departed the room quickly and left the hotel.
RNZ News understands the police failed to catch Anchondo and he's still on the run. Cook and Suarez also fled. They returned to the Te Aratu home, dumped the packages and headed out to the airport. They were booked on a flight to Los Angeles, but instead they were arrested in the departure lounge by police officers. The prosecutor, David Stevens, said the Crown had thought of asking for life sentences for the pair, but recognised there were players further up the tree than Cook Sr. and Suarez. Cook's lawyer, Sam Wimsett, said his client would be deported as soon as he had finished his sentence and posed no future risk to New Zealand.
The reality is that at his age, the sentence to be imposed is going to be significant in terms of his available years to spend with children and grandchildren.
Suarez's lawyer, Peter Kay, asked for a discount because his client would be serving his sentence in a foreign country, away from friends and family, and spoke little English. In sentencing, Justice Cates said Suarez was more culpable, as he would have received a share of the profits. There was also evidence he had travelled to and from Colombia. Text messages to another man appeared to be drug talk.
You denied in evidence that those text messages related to drugs and said that you were actually discussing with a friend his involvement in the trafficking of women from those countries to Mexico. Neither explanation reflects particularly well on your character.
She took time off Cook Sr.'s sentence for his previous good character, and Suarez for serving his sentence in a foreign country where he didn't speak the language. Mo te hōtaka o te ahi ko Edward Gay aho.
The Māori Party wants Mike Hosking to be dumped from his role as election debate moderator, saying the TVNZ presenter's misleading comments about the Māori role have done irreparable damage to its campaign. During an episode of 7 Sharp last night, Mr Hosking told his co-host, Tony Street, that she couldn't vote for the Māori Party because she wasn't on the Māori roll. TVNZ admits his comments were wrong, but the Māori Party's president says the damage has already been done, and he's laid a complaint with TVNZ and the Electoral Commission. Anusha Bradley reports.
Mike Hosking made the comment as his 7 Sharp co-host Tony Street was talking about One News's Vote Compass online tool.
And for me, it clarified where I should be voting.
Really?
Yes.
OK, so you're more
I thought
clear.
it was really
so
good.
is the fact that you can't vote for the Maori Party because you're not enrolled in the Maori electorate, so what are you going to do now? I'm joking.
I'm like, what are you even talking about?
Māori Party President Tukururangi Morgan says the party's had an endless stream of calls and emails from voters since the prime time broadcast last night asking for clarification, and he's angry.
It's appallingly misinformed, and I am deeply upset about those comments from Mike Hosking. I think he's damaged our campaign because he's put out fictitious information.
Mr Morgan wants Mike Hosking removed as moderator of TVNZ's election debates. Mr Hosking is hosting 2 leaders' debates as well as a minor parties debate. Mr Morgan has also complained with TVNZ and the Electoral Commission.
We're also conveying our deep-seated disappointment and concern that someone of the stature of Mike Hosking, who is a well-known radio and television presenter, can make such a blunder at this time during the campaign.
TVNZ says in a statement it accepts Mike Hosking's comments were inaccurate and it will make a clarification on tonight's program to clear up any confusion. The Electoral Commission says it is aware there's some confusion about the difference between the Māori and general roles, and it advises people to check out the information on its website, which for the record is: every voter has 2 votes, a party vote and an electorate vote. Voters of Māori descent can choose whether to be enrolled in a general or Māori electoral seat. For Checkpoint, Anusha Bradley.
And it is 21 minutes past 5 here on Checkpoint. Coming up, an outbreak of mumps in Auckland spreads to Dunedin, and police confirm a headless torso found in the waters of Denmark belongs to Swedish journalist Kim Wall. We'd love your feedback. You can text us on 2101, you can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, Facebook us, Checkpoint with John Campbell, or email checkpoint@radionz.co.nz. And you can watch us live on Facebook Live at rnz.co.nz/checkpoint, on Freeview Channel 50 and on Face TV Sky Channel 83. Well, 2 weeks after the shock resignation of Matiria Ture, the remaining Green Party leader, James Shaw, is battling on alone on the campaign trail. The party's plummeted in the polls, and this week it was revealed 2 of its senior staff quit following the turmoil surrounding the resignation of Mrs Ture. Last night there was another surprise when the Greens made an 11th-hour decision to stand a candidate in Ohariu after keeping the way clear for Labour to boost its chances of winning the Wellington seat. Our political reporter May Heron has been out with the Greens leader today.
After a tough few weeks, it isn't getting any easier for James Shaw. Today, he faced the challenge of trying to understand children talking with their mouth full of food.
Margot. Milo, like the drink. Do people call you hot chocolate?
Starting off at Aro Valley Preschool, James Shaw and a few MPs from other parties promised more funding and support for early childhood teachers. Today is a relatively quiet day for James Shaw. As the sole leader, his campaign schedule is now more packed than before, as he tries to lift his own profile with Matiria Ture gone.
So yesterday was one of my most manic days yet. I did 9 different gigs between about 5:30 in the morning and 9:30 at night.
The fallout from Mrs Ture's departure became evident on Tuesday when it was revealed the party's chief of staff and political director had quit just over a month out from the election. James Shaw says their resignations haven't affected his campaign.
I mean, frankly, with 1 calendar month to go until election day, I can't spend any time looking in the rearview mirror. You know, I've got to be, leading the campaign, getting us through the election and getting us into government.
Selma.
Hello, James.
James, yes.
Lovely to see you.
Know your face.
From the under-5s to the over-50s, Mr Shaw spent the rest of his day at an Ohariu Wellington Central candidate debate at the Malvina Major retirement home in Johnsonville. There he had to defend his party's surprise decision yesterday to stand a candidate in the Ohariu electorate, following the departure of the incumbent United Future leader Peter Dunn. Mr Shaw says the Greens need to focus on themselves and the move is designed to increase their party vote.
It actually helps Labour as well, in the sense that the stronger the Green Party is, the stronger coalition partner they have after the election.
James Shaw acknowledges there are some concerns the move will split the vote on the left, though Labour's leader Jacinda Ardern says she has confidence in her candidate and she's adamant the Greens' decision doesn't put any strain on their relationship.
No, not at all. As we've always said, the MOU is a message to voters that if we're given the opportunity, we will work together in government. But ultimately, in every individual seat, we've been consistently running our own campaigns.
Out on the streets of the Ohario electorate, voter reaction ranged from the well-informed to the, well, gobsmacked.
Tane's already said it's about the party vote, not the electorate. People probably not going to vote for a guy who doesn't want it, because he doesn't want the electorate. Why would he say that if he wanted it, right?
It's turned this electorate on its head. You've got a national candidate who's now probably got a chance of getting in because the Greens and Labour will split the vote.
It sort of makes a bit of a nonsense of their so-called agreement with the Labour Party.
Not at all chaotic, that's politics. This is par for the course. People are juggling for it. They all want their MP in.
Maybe they're now deciding that no, they need to bring somebody else in. That's what happens in politics, so I'm not at all surprised.
Until recently, Labour's Greg O'Connor had a good chance of winning the seat, with a recent poll giving him 48% of the vote, while ahead of Peter Dunn on 34% and National's Brett Hudson on 14%. But the contest could now become a lot closer if Mr Dunn's supporters shift to back National and, if unwittingly or not, the Greens candidate Tane Woodley picks up any of Greg O'Connor's vote. Kei whanganui atara mō te hōtaka o te ahi ko mei hirin aho.
And now to the bizarre and grisly case of the missing journalist Kim Wall. The police have confirmed that the headless torso found in the waters off Denmark is that of Ms Wall and that her body had been deliberately mutilated. Kim Wall was last seen on board the private submarine owned by Danish inventor Peter Madsen 2 weeks ago. He's been charged with manslaughter. He'd initially told police he'd dropped her on shore and then changed his story, saying she'd died at sea in an accident and he'd buried her at sea. The BBC's Chris Rogers has this report.
It's August the 10th and freelance journalist Kim Wall is on assignment, writing a feature about Danish inventor Peter Madsen. They are snapped as they set off in his homemade submarine. 10 days later, a cyclist discovered a torso which had washed up on a beach south of Copenhagen, with the head and limbs deliberately cut off. Today, the police confirmed the DNA matched the journalist's.
We do have a match with a hairbrush and toothbrush belonging to Kim Wall, blood on the submarine and the torso that we dissected yesterday. There's also some metal attached to the body in an apparent attempt to make it sink to the bottom.
The submarine was discovered sinking hours into a police search for Miss Wall, after her partner reported her missing. Peter Madsen was rescued from his vessel and charged with negligent manslaughter. It's a case that has gripped the public imagination.
People have been following this case ever since this accident happened, ever since Kim Wall was missing, and ever since it's been big news here in Denmark, and something which people, young, old, men and women, are discussing and talking about.
As police continue to search for the remaining body parts, Mr Madsen's lawyer said the news that the torso is Miss Wall does not change her client's position, which is that the journalist died in an accident. He pleaded not guilty.
Chris Rogers with that report. An outbreak of mumps in Auckland has spread to Dunedin, which is experiencing its first outbreak of the disease in years. The South Island city's public health authorities say there have been 12 confirmed cases since late July. It comes as the mumps outbreak in Auckland continues to spread, reaching 260 confirmed and probable cases by late yesterday. Our health correspondent Karen Brown reports.
The Southern District Health Board says all but 2 of the cases of mumps in Dunedin arose in the past 10 days. A medical officer of health, Naomi Goff, says they believe the Dunedin cases have been brought back to the city from Auckland and the Pacific, where there are outbreaks. She adds that not all the Dunedin cases are linked, but it has spread in the city, forcing authorities to change their tactics.
rather than focusing on intense case-by-case investigations for all of those mumps notifications, because we know that it is now circulating through the community, what we're really focusing on is targeting those populations that we believe are at risk and vaccinating them prior to them becoming exposed to mumps.
Dr Goff says mumps, which is usually mild but can lead to complications, is spread in the same way as colds and flu. Those who have had mumps or had 2 doses of the MMR vaccine are protected. In Dunedin, most cases appear connected to students at the university and polytechnic, and Dr Goff says they're the focus.
If they are not sure whether they're immune to mumps, they're encouraged to get vaccinated. The MMR vaccine is free to anyone who needs it. If people are unsure whether they've had 2 or not, there's no harm in getting a 3rd.
The DHB is using social media and other advertising tools to target students who are in the midst of midterm exams, encouraging them to be aware of the mumps outbreak and check whether they've had 2 doses of the vaccine. A clinical group leader at Student Health, Catherine Martin, says they're listening and 150 vaccinations have been given in the past 3 weeks.
There is always a slight risk in the background. And of course, if you get mumps, you have to be isolated for 5 days. So that means no lectures, no socialising. It's pretty inconvenient if you have got a heavy workload of study to complete.
Another 36 doses were given yesterday at a special clinic for Pacific Island residents in the city. At the Auckland Regional Public Health Service, clinical leader Julia Peters says that's important as Pacifica who have been vaccinated may remain unprotected.
We know that in some Pacific countries the vaccination does not include mumps. It is a measles rubella vaccination, so people may think they have received MMR, but they haven't.
Dr Peters says the outbreak in Auckland, which began at the start of the year, is not letting up, with cases still rising.
The volumes we're seeing exceed the combined volumes we've seen in the last 12 years before this started. And yes, the outbreak is ongoing in the Auckland region.
Dr Peters says young people between 10 and 19 are most affected, with vaccination rates in this age group much lower than it should be. She's also pleading that people in Auckland who can't recall if they've had 2 doses of the vaccine see a family doctor as soon as possible. For Checkpoint, Karen Brown.
Coming up, the speed limit set to increase to 110 kilometres per hour on 7 major roads before the end of the year. The All Blacks announced their starting lineup for Saturday's second test against the Wallabies, and 2 Paua named Thelma and Louise attend a conference strapped with heart monitors to demonstrate the impact of climate change. But first, here's Katrina Batten with the headlines.
Northland's DHB's chief executive says his board will be more than $7 million in deficit this year and won't be able to submit its annual report to the Ministry of Health. In a frank letter to the DHB staff, Nick Chamberlain says the board doesn't get enough money because the ministry's population-based funding model is flawed. He says it's struggling to care for one of the highest needs populations in the country. The Māori Party says comments by TVNZ's Mike Hosking about the Māori role have caused irreparable damage to its campaign. During a discussion on 7 Sharp last night, Hosking told his co-host she couldn't vote for the Māori Party as she's not on the Māori roll. Under MMP, any voter can give their party vote to the Māori Party. Its president, Tukurorangi Morgan, says Hosking has misled voters with his comments, and he's laid a complaint with the Electoral Commission and TVNZ. The State Services Commission is investigating after the National Party's campaign slogan featured in a presentation at Treasury yesterday. Commission rules require government departments to stay clear of party politics in the run-up to a general election. The slogan "Delivering for New Zealanders" appeared during the Finance Minister's slideshow during the pre-election fiscal update. The 2 men who helped a drug syndicate to bring 35 kilograms of cocaine into the country had buyers lined up for the Class A drug. It was the largest single shipment ever detected here. Today, Ronald Cook Sr. was jailed for 17 years and 9 months and Augustine Suarez for 19 years and 9 months. The court heard how customs detected the drugs inside a bronze horsehead statue and replaced them with flour to make the bust. Young people in Dunedin are being urged to get the MMR vaccine if they don't know if they're fully immunised against mumps. The city is experiencing a mumps outbreak with 12 confirmed cases, most of them notified in the past 10 days. Those are the headlines. I'm back at 6, Rowan.
Thanks very much, Katrina. And we're turning to business news now with Giles Beckford. And Giles, there was a deluge of company reports today. What are the standouts?
Good evening to you, Rowan. Yes, we had 10 of them all together today. We were really swimming just to try and stay in one place. Amongst the bigger ones, power company Meridian, slight rise in profits, although most of its power is generated out of the South Island hydro lakes, which of course were low because of the dry winter. But it had insurance. It buys power from Genesis in those times. Therefore, it managed to preserve its earnings, and it also managed to actually give a bit of an increased dividend to its shareholders. EBOS, now you may not recognise the name, but it's a diversified group in pharmaceuticals, animal healthcare, health food supplements. If I said to you Red Seal and Animates Pet Centres, you'd guess who they are. They've grown phenomenally over the past 5 or so years. They've got a very good knack of buying businesses with good growth, good earnings, just bolting them on. And before you know it, they're adding considerably to profit. Profit was slower, a bit slower this year, the growth. Normally in the past, it's been 15% plus. This year it's around 7%. It's a big group now, and therefore it's having to take a little bit long to digest things, but it too was rewarding its shareholders with improved dividend payout. We should take a look at Trade Me. Everybody talks about how Amazon might come and eat their lunch. No sign of that yet. Their profits up by a quarter, reports of strong growth across all their divisions, although they're wondering about whether real estate will hold up going into the new year. NZ Refining, the people who run the Marsden Point refinery, you would think that they're a sunset industry, but they've just spent $300 million upgrading the refinery. And the chief executive there has a rather defiant tone to those who think that the electric cars are coming. He says, not in my lifetime, probably. And for those investment funds wanting to quit carbon fuels and fossil fuels, he was saying, get real, the world still needs fuel, we'll be making it and selling it for quite some time. So those were some of the big ones. NZME, the people who publish the Herald and own a radio station, the radio network, their earnings pretty flat, but they're a changed business, having demerged from their parent last year. And all they're saying really is, we would really love to get into bed with Fairfax Media. We'll have to wait for a High Court fixture on that one.
Yeah, busy day, Giles, and on top of all those earnings, there were some annual meetings today as well.
They were indeed. The annual meetings are always an interesting affair. Everybody thinks they're quite boring and they're just peopled by with old people who go there for the tea and the cakes. But you actually get some real nuggets out of them. 3 of them in particular today. Fisher & Paykel Healthcare, our leading manufacturing company, it says that the stronger New Zealand dollar is hurting its earnings just a wee bit, some headwinds there. So it's expecting lower earnings in the coming year. Metro Performance Glass, a quiet performer, but it's the country's biggest glass maker, big in the construction industry, but it's reporting soft conditions, soft trading conditions. It got thumped by around 10% today. And also Infratil. Now they're boring, they're into utilities and infrastructure. Interesting from them though, comments about their New Zealand bus operation. They're saying the way that public transport is being funded these days, which is emphasis on low cost, will mean that the change into electric vehicles to battery driven buses is going to be delayed. They just can't afford to do it. They're not economic. So there's an interesting aspect on that one.
Absolutely. And just finally, Giles, what has happened on the markets today?
For all that, the top 50 index shares down 11 points at 7868. The New Zealand dollar still on the soft side at 72.2 US cents and 91.4 Australian.
Thanks very much. That was Giles Beckford with the business news there. Well, Dutch police are investigating a potential terror attack on a rock concert in the city of Rotterdam. At the last minute, they cancelled the concert by the Californian band, the A La Las, after finding a van filled with gas canisters nearby. They were acting on a tip-off from Spanish police, and a man is now in custody. With more, here's the BBC's Tim Allman.
Once again, armed police on the streets of a European city. A local music venue cordoned off, people being told to go home. A concert that was cancelled after a warning of a potential terror attack.
The information we received from Spanish police suggested there was an attack planned on a concert by an American band. The information was so serious that the police consulted with the owners. 2 options were considered: let the event go ahead with increased security, or possibly cancelling it. They thought it was justified to cancel the concert.
The band who were supposed to perform are called the Allah Lahs. They come from California and have had some controversy over their name and the use of the Arabic name for God. They were escorted away by police, while concert goers were turned away. We're from around here, so it's not a big problem, said this man. It's a bummer for those who came from afar. They basically came here for nothing. I'm curious to hear the reason for the cancellation. I'd like to know exactly what's going on, said this man, what information this decision was based on. Not far away, a van was found with Spanish number plates containing gas canisters. It's not clear if this was linked to the cancellation of the concert, but the van is being examined and the driver, also believed to be Spanish, is being questioned by police. This may have been a tragedy averted. This may have all been a false alarm, but it's now being reported that this incident is not linked to last week's terror attacks in and around Barcelona.
That was Tim Orman from Amsterdam. Well, New Zealand drivers with a need for speed will soon be able to hit new limits on some major roads. The government's confirmed motorists will be able to travel at 110 kilometres an hour on 7 roads before the end of the year, including Tauranga's Eastern Link and parts of the Waikato Expressway. As Eva Corlett reports, most people support the change, but some warn that it will make drivers go even faster.
The new limit applies only to roads of a high standard under National's Roads of Significance project. They include the Puhoi to Wellsford Highway, the Wellington Northern Corridor and Christchurch motorways. Current restrictions for cars or trucks pulling trailers still apply. The Associate Transport spokesperson for the National Party, Tim McIndoe, says that there has been a lot of consultation over the change.
There have been no fatalities on these particular roads yet. They are infinitely safer than roads that we were used to even 10 or 15 years ago. It reflects the huge investment that we've been putting into improving the quality and the safety of our roads. I am confident that they will still have a very high safety record.
Most people think the change is overdue, but say safety still comes first.
If they build the roads correctly and it's designed for 110, then that's fine, as long as, let's say, people do what they're supposed to do.
Get there faster, so what? What are you going to do when you get there? Enjoy the scenery.
I think it's overdue to happen. Sure, there's a lot of car crashes at the moment, but that might not be down to speed on our motorways. Everyone's getting speeding tickets in that awkward range between 100 and 110, and it's just an absolute pain. But yeah, as long as we're doing what needs to be done in terms of maintaining that safety.
Then that would up it to about 120 is what people would be running at rather than 110.
Tim McIndoe says he's not concerned about people taking advantage of the new rule.
Ultimately, everybody is responsible for the decisions they make, and they must obey the road rules. You can't make all your road rules because a few people won't obey them. You've got to set them for the vast majority of people who are law-abiding.
Mr McIndoe says many people will be happy to go faster, which he says is good for personal travel and for economic productivity. The Automobile Association's General Manager of Motoring, Mike Noon, says the move is well overdue.
This was an election call from the AA. It's interesting because we're in an election cycle now in 2014, so maybe good things take time.
Mr Noon says 79% of the association's members have been calling for increased limits on high-quality roads since 2014. He says the new roads are purposely designed for high speeds.
They're divided, they're multi-lane, they've got runoffs, they've got wide lanes, they've got good delineation. They don't have things like trees and poles and ditches along the sides of them. These are roads which are designed for a safe operating speed of 110.
Mike Noon says some countries with the lowest road death tolls have speed limits up to 130. Break NZ is a national road safety charity that supports people bereaved or injured in car crashes. Its director, Caroline Perry, says she sees the devastation that speed causes. Ms Perry can't comment on the policy because of restrictions on charities during election time, but she says speed is almost always a factor in car accidents.
Speed is a key issue on our roads, and whilst it may not be the cause of all crashes, it's a factor in all crashes because it's determines the outcome. So it's basic physics that the faster you're going on any roads, the longer it's going to take you to stop, and the more severe the impact if you're in a crash. So the more likely you are to be seriously injured or killed.
Ms Perry wants to see continued improvements around roads, driving behaviour and car safety. The government says parts of Waikato Expressway and Tauranga roads will be ready for faster limits by the end of the year. Kapiti and Christchurch are also tipped for fast limits at a later date. I Tamaki Makaurau, mo te hōtaka o te ahiahi, ko Eva Corlett, tēnei.
Well, having battled injury for much of the year, hooker Dane Coles will finally get to chalk up 50 tests for the All Blacks when they play the second Bledisloe Cup test in Dunedin this weekend. Coles has played just 90 minutes for the Hurricanes since mid-March after suffering knee and calf injuries, then enduring concussion problems. That's ruled him out of the test against Samoa and the British and Irish Line series. But now he's back, and as sports editor Stephen Hewson reports, keen to make up for lost time.
Having missed the bulk of the Super Rugby season and not having played a test since last November, Dane Coles started worrying whether he'd ever get to reach the 50-test milestone.
Because obviously I've been in the team but I haven't been playing, so it's kind of like been a bit of a food ball, so everyone's been giving me a bit of stick about that. But yeah, just excited just to get out and, you know, chatting with the team again, just all the little things that you've been missing. So yeah, it's like my first test all over again.
Coles' Hurricanes and All Blacks teammate Beauden Barrett says it was difficult watching his mate Coles struggle through the Super Rugby season, but there's been a noticeable change in his personality in recent weeks.
Dane wasn't himself for most of that Hurricane season, but you know, as the last couple of months have gone on, he's got back to playing footy and he's back to himself. So all I've seen of Dane this week, it reminds me of his son Jax running around like a little toddler. He's that excited, and we are too to have him back.
Coles admits he has some apprehension over returning to the Test arena.
There's always a bit of fear, that's just natural, but it's just not letting that fear control you. Like when I'm out there, like training or doing contact, I'm not thinking about in my head, I'm just making a tackle, throwing a line out. Yeah, I think that's just what I've learned is, look, don't let it control you, and once I'm in the moment doing things, I'm just, you know, doing my job and playing footy.
The All Blacks have had a hiccup in their preparation for the Dunedin Test, with prop Owen Franks initially named in the starting lineup this morning, but he's now had to withdraw with a hamstring injury. Chiefs prop Nepo Laulala will come into the starting 15. Meanwhile, the Wallabies coach Michael Cheika has resisted the urge to make wholesale changes in his side in the wake of the 54-34 loss in Sydney. Centre Samu Kerevi's paid the price for a poor defensive performance and been replaced by Tavita Kurandrani. The veteran lock Rob Simmons replaces Rory Arnold, and Dane Haylett-Petty's recovered from injury to replace Curtis Rona on the left wing. New Zealand Rugby will also honour the late Sir Colin Meads at the match. All Blacks lock Sam Whitelock, who shares the number 5 jersey with Sir Colin, will give his playing strip to the Meads family, while a moment's silence will also be observed before the match. For Checkpoint, Stephen Hewson.
Wireless journalist Max Toll has been touring the country talking to young Kiwis about what matters most to them ahead of the election. Tonight, Max turns his attention to Kawerau in the Bay of Plenty.
It took us about an hour to drive from Tauranga to Kawerau, and frankly the two places couldn't be more different. Kawerau used to thrive as a mill town until the paper machines started being sold off overseas. Jobs were lost, shops closed up. The town's unemployment rate is high, and as an area, the average wage is lower than anywhere else in New Zealand. When Danielle Hayes won New Zealand's top model 7 years ago, she told cameras she'd be dead or pregnant if she'd stayed in Kawerau. That year and the next, there were 5 youth suicides here. But Kawerau is still standing, and we're here today to ask those still living in the town and in the area what it's like and what the future may hold.
I think it's a really good town because it's only like population of 7,000, so everyone knows each other, and it's just a really loving town.
Our town looks beautiful, nice and clean. I grew up in the town where it was, most of the shops were more closed and everything, but it's more lightened up now.
We met up with Warwick Godfrey and a few of his fellow youth workers. Warwick has mentored young people in the town for more than 20 years.
Kawerau is a community that goes up and down, but I know that we've got a strong sense of community spirit in this town, a very strong sense of community oneness, and a good group of people that are working very hard for positive change.
Yeah, so I'm currently a youth mentor, and I deal with high-risk kids, and I go out there, mentor them, being like a big brother to them into the community, show them around. We do a lot of stuff, like mahi kai is probably one of my strongest things. It's only 20 minutes to the beach, so we go fishing, or we'll go to the Tarawera forest. That's only like another 10, 20 minutes away, go eeling, watercress picking, and just showing a new love to these kids who have got none.
What are the type of issues that you find rangatahi around here face?
I think the biggest one from our recent survey has been job opportunities. So a lot of them are going into training but coming out and there's not the right sort of jobs or enough jobs to keep them occupied.
Warwick then offered to introduce us to the Mayor of Kawerau, who happened to be working in his butcher shop across the road.
Well, I think the biggest issue is hope to try and get a job. That's our number one aim here, to get everyone into a job, and it's something that's not just with Kawerau, it's right across the country. You know, young people leaving school and with no hope, and that's what we want to try and stop. It's an absolute bloody tragedy, actually, right around the country.
What are the types of paths young people go down in terms of employment?
Well, look, that is an issue here, because we have not got those readily, available jobs, and I mean, goodness gracious, to go down and clean toilets at the mill now, you just about need a university degree, which is just absolutely ridiculous. What my council are looking at now, we're going down another track. Rather than finding people jobs or work, we're trying to create jobs and bring industry into the community. And so, we're staring down the barrel of probably 1,000 jobs if we can pull off a couple of big ones here. So that's big time.
Can I ask you what's...
No, you can't. I'd have to kill you.
Top secret.
I'd have to kill you.
Right. Lee Barton runs the Adventure Hub in Kawerau, which opened earlier this year. The modern facility is a place where many youth groups can stay and go whitewater rafting on the Tarawera River.
One of the saddest bits is the well-educated and good young people, they leave the region, so you lose that kind of level of driving force in the youth area. But that creates an opportunity for other young people. And everybody in the Eastern Bay has been very aware of that for a long time, and there's lots of efforts to try and increase the potential to keep young people here and keep them with jobs.
Yeah, there are opportunities, but it's very limiting, especially in small rural towns. There's not a lot going on, so you sort of have to look outside of the areas.
Well, if you ain't doing any sports, if you ain't keeping busy, then I think life here will be pretty hard.
You lived around here very long?
Yeah, most of my life.
How'd you find it?
It's pretty cool.
Yeah?
Just, you know most of the people around here, so it's a nice little community.
Can I ask, what are your hopes, what are your dreams growing up? What would you like to do?
Me, I want to go into the army to New Zealand. Yeah.
Can I ask why?
Because I've always wanted to go there, so yeah. And it's, travel.
I don't think I would ever move. I can't imagine myself living in a place where I don't know everyone.
And that was the wireless journalist Max Toll speaking to people in Kawerau. And you can watch the whole series on thewireless.co.nz. Well, humble paua strapped with a heart rate monitor have been used to demonstrate the effects of climate change. Paua biologist Norman Ragg of Nelson's Cawthron Institute and self-titled tree hugger gave delegates at an industry conference today an insight into the heart and feelings of the mollusk. He urged those in the business to spare a thought for the animals they work with as a way of mitigating looming environmental impacts. Our Nelson reporter Tracy Neal went along and filed this report.
In an aquarium at the front of the conference room, two paua named Thelma and Louise lay quietly. A heart rate monitor was attached to each, and on a large screen behind, their hearts beat out a regular rhythm. But then Thelma nearly had a heart attack when seawater pumped full of carbon dioxide from a soda machine was tipped on her. Louise reacted much the same when warm water was tipped in her tank. Dr. Norman Ragg says the experiment revealed two key indicators of climate change: the effects on sea creatures from warmer seas and more CO2 filling them up.
For an industry like the Paua fishery, that is actually a really powerful message.
Dr. Ragg, a shellfish physiologist, says paua are actually ancient snails, and while they are clever at adapting to change, they're threatened by the current state of environmental change. Paua Industry Council Chief Executive Jeremy Cooper says they're worried, mainly because there's lots they don't know. He says there are lessons to be learned from the effects of sudden ocean acidification on a shellfish hatchery in the United States in 2009.
Yeah, but it's the time we're talking that we don't understand. So what we've learnt in the last little while is that hatchery in America had a big fright. All of a sudden they couldn't raise any more oysters, and we thought it was going to be shell dissolving, but it wasn't. It was the very first little larvae as they formed, the very first layer of calcium wasn't forming, so the larvae were all dead within 2 days.
Mr. Cooper says paua may not be growing beyond the larvae stage at the moment in the commercial zone across the top of the South Island. Dr. Ragg realised paua was his true calling when he stumbled upon a strange rock on his farm south of Nelson, which turned out to be a 200-million-year-old abalone trace fossil raised by large earthquakes along a major fault line in the area. Dr. Ragg says today's paua are effectively living fossils with a special resilience we should be taking more notice of.
It is a privilege to have something like this still alive today, available for us to regard as taonga, regard as a commercial species, and to actually understand something about the way animals do and don't evolve and adapt.
Harvey Whakaruru, who was at today's conference on behalf of the Te Atiawa o Te Waka a Maui Trust, says paua is a taonga that needs to be looked after. He says today's experiment gave him a newfound respect for it.
Absolutely amazing. You know, sometimes you just go down to the ocean to get these taonga, and you never think that they're living creatures.
Did you know they had heartbeats?
Never knew they had a heartbeat. All I see is the feet moving along on the ground when you go down and get them, and the feelers are out there.
Dr. Ragg says better environmental monitoring, habitat restoration and a better understanding of what's really happening can help slow and even turn around the tide of climate change. In Nelson for Checkpoint, Tracy Neal.
A North Otago stock agent fears a cow disease outbreak there will become national because he sold cattle from an infected farm around the country. A third farm was confirmed yesterday with the disease Mycoplasma bovis in the region, the first outside the Van Leeuwen group in South Canterbury. But the Ministry for Primary Industries disputes that any stock from this farm has been sent to the North Island. Our Otago Southland reporter Ian Telfer has this report from North Otago.
On farms south of Oamaru, trucks and trailers are coming and going, and there are few signs of a major biosecurity incident. But a month into the Mycoplasma bovis outbreak, it's on most dairy farmers' minds. A local farmer and stock agent who wouldn't be named says he fears the disease is on the move.
The reality is that if it's been here for a while, there is an awful lot of stock goes out of both North Otago and South Canterbury, and it goes right through the country, and I would hate to think that it's been here for 6 months, because if it has been here for 6 months, it's going to be one hell of a lot more problem than the authorities are admitting to.
Farmers in the district are all talking about the farm they believe to be infected, and many feel it should be named publicly so everyone knows what they're dealing with. The Ministry for Primary Industry says it won't name the farm unless the farmer wants to be identified because of privacy laws. When RNZ News visited the farm said to be infected, the gate was padlocked and there was no sign of movement, nor any warning notices on the property. But the agent says he personally sold cattle from that farm to Northland in the past 6 months.
At the moment, probably the emphasis is on trying to solve the problem here, but if it's been transmitted, With older stock, I think we're going to have a major problem in our hands, and I don't think Cook Strait's going to solve the problem.
But from the Ministry's Incident Command Centre in Oamaru, the controller, Stuart Rawnsley, says it's doing everything possible, and there's no reason yet to think the disease has spread wider. Mr Rawnsley says no stock's gone from this third farm to the North Island.
There haven't been, to our knowledge, any cattle movements that have gone from this gentleman's property through sale yards on and then on sold.
In what period?
In our high risk period.
Which is what?
From February to the present time.
Mr Rawnsley says they've traced all the cattle sold from the farm, and it all ended up no more than 300 or 400 kilometres from the infected property and within the wider region. However, he cautions there's a lot they still don't know about the disease.
I don't know how far away from me it is in certain directions, but in this particular direction with this particular farm, we believe that we've traced every animal movement from it in the risk period, and we now have that situation contained.
Mr Rawnsley says he can't say the disease is not in the North Island, but it won't be for lack of trying to trace its spread. In North Otago for Checkpoint, Ian Telfer.
And after 6 o'clock here, the Health Minister Jonathan Coleman joins us live to discuss the Northland DHB's projected deficit and its refusal to submit its annual report.
RNZ News at 6. Ngā mihi nui, good evening. Ko Katrina Batten tēnei. The Northland District Health Board is refusing to submit its annual report to the Ministry of Health unless it gets more funding. In a frank letter to the DHB's staff, the Chief Executive, Nick Chamberlain, says it's missed out on $30 million over 3 years because the population-based funding model is flawed. And he says they're struggling to care for one of the highest needs populations in the country. Mr Chamberlain says the board will be more than $7 million in deficit this year. In the letter, he urges staff to continue to provide safe, high-quality care and be as frugal as possible with scarce resources. The Canterbury District Health Board is also at loggerheads with the ministry over its deficit. It says it can't slash $36 million of spending without unprecedented service cuts. The National Party is facing questions about its campaign slogan making an appearance at yesterday's pre-election fiscal update at Treasury. The leader, Bill English, says the State Service Commission will investigate whether it was appropriate. Here's our political editor, Jane Patterson.
The slogan, Delivering for New Zealanders, appeared during the Finance Minister Stephen Joyce's slideshow briefing. State Services Commission rules require government departments to stay clear of party politics in the run-up to a general election. Bill English says the slogan also featured in the May budget, which was government business. The Commission says it's working with the Treasury to get a better idea of what happened. This is Jane Patterson.
The Labour Party isn't saying whether it would contribute to the construction costs of a new stadium for Christchurch if elected. A government report released yesterday outlines 4 options for a new multi-use arena design costing from $368 million. The City Council has committed $253 million to building the arena, but says other funding partners will be needed. The National Party today pledged $120 million towards construction. But Labour's Canterbury spokesperson Megan Woods wouldn't confirm what a Labour-led government would offer. Ms Woods says Labour's policies for Christchurch will be announced when the party leader Jacinda Ardern visits the city on Sunday. A house is on fire in the Christchurch suburb of Riccarton. The fire service says the house on the corner of Tika Street and Centennial Avenue caught fire just after 3 o'clock and is now fully engulfed in flames. They say they don't believe there's anyone inside and 2 fire trucks are at the scene. A report on sexual violence among students reveals many people don't realise their experience counts as abuse. The report was done by Izzy O'Neill from the New Zealand Union of Students' Associations. She says 9% of respondents reported being raped, but 19% said they had sex without their consent, which is the usual definition for rape.
That difference shows that we don't have enough education about non-consensual sex. What does it mean in terms of it actually being rape and it being assault?
Izzy O'Neill says the reason some people would find it difficult to call their experience abuse is because most victims were assaulted by a partner or former partner.
Judges at the Australian High Court have postponed hearings into whether senior ministers can hold office when they're also citizens of other countries. The government had wanted the fate of the Deputy Prime Minister Barnaby Joyce, who's a New Zealander by descent, and 4 others to be decided swiftly. The ABC's Robin Ironside reports.
A preliminary hearing has been held in Brisbane for 5 of the 7 federal politicians under scrutiny. Deputy Prime Minister Barnaby Joyce, colleague Matt Canavan, One Nation's Malcolm Roberts and former Green Senators Scott Ludlam and Larissa Waters. The Solicitor General told the court the cases should be dealt with as quickly as possible. Originally submitting the matter should be heard in September to give certainty on the makeup of Parliament. Lawyers for Senator Roberts asked for a later date in order to review expert evidence. The matter has been set down for 3 days in Canberra beginning on the 10th of October.
Robin Ironside reporting. Māori Television has formally opened its new South Auckland premises. A dawn service led by local kaumātua was held with traditional karakia to bless the new building. Later in the morning, an official pōwhiri was held which was attended by iwi leaders, politicians and school children. A board member, Piripi Walker, says moving the television station to South Auckland made sense because of the number of Māori who live in the community.
You know, over 20 marae in this region in the south. You've got such Māori history just over the way there is the marae of Te Puea and so many kura and kohanga reo, and that became a factor in the thinking of the board to locate it adjacent to or alongside the growing Māori speaking communities.
Māori Television board member Piripi Walker. The television station will also start transmitting in high definition today. It's 6:05. To sport, and the Wallabies centre Samu Kerevi has paid the price for a poor performance in last weekend's record loss to the All Blacks, dropped for the return test in Dunedin on Saturday night. The coach Michael Cheika resisted the urge to overhaul his team despite the 54-34 hammering, making only 3 changes to the starting lineup. Tavita Kurandrani replaces Kerevi, while lock Rory Arnold drops to the reserves, replaced by Rob Simmons. In the third change, Dane Haylett-Petty returns on the wing after recovering from injury, replacing Curtis Rona. New Zealand Rugby will also honour the late Sir Colin Meads at the match. All Blacks lock Sam Whitelock, who shares the number 5 jersey with Sir Colin, will give his playing jersey to the Meads family, and a silence will be observed before the match. New Zealand's premier canoe sprinter Lisa Carrington will attempt her busiest World Championships yet in the Czech Republic this weekend. The double Rio Olympic medalist will compete in her favoured K1 200 and 500 events, as well as the K2 500 and K4 500. Lisa Carrington could potentially race 12 times over 4 days, but says her recent training in Europe has prepared her for it.
Obviously physically it'd be huge because of the potential of 12 races, hoping for 10 races. But yeah, it will be physically very tough, and same mentally. It will just, for me, it will just be around taking one race at a time, basically just putting one foot in front of the other.
Racing starts overnight. Another high-profile men's tennis player will be missing from the US Open after Milos Raonic withdrew due to a wrist injury. Raonic joins Novak Djokovic, Stan Wawrinka and Kei Nishikori in missing the final Grand Slam of the year, which starts in New York next week. Meanwhile, New Zealand's Marina Irakovic has been beaten in the first round of singles qualifying for event. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, put on your dance shoes for the story of Margaret Austin, from Palmerston North Sunday school teacher to Paris showgirl. And that's just the half of it. Our Changing World looks at the science of virtual reality, while this week's cultural ambassador, modern dancer Chris Giannidis, wants to celebrate the work of Ross McCormick. In fact, he's bringing Ross in with him. On Nights with me, Brian Crump, from afternoon news at 7 on RNZ National.
Met Service weather to midnight tomorrow. Northland, a few showers, mainly in the north and east. Auckland and Coromandel Peninsula, also Taranaki, Kapiti and Wellington. Fine apart from a few cloudy areas and isolated showers. For the remainder of the North Island, also Nelson, Marlborough, Canterbury, North Otago and Dunedin. Mostly fine, isolated showers about Bay of Plenty, Waikato, Taupo and northern Gisborne tomorrow. Buller and Westland, cloudy periods with a few showers. Fiordland and Stewart Island, periods of rain, possibly heavy about Fiordland. For the remainder of Southland, cloudy periods and scattered rain. Central Otago and Clutha, high cloud increasing with a few spots of rain tomorrow and occasional showers for the Chatham Islands. It's just gone 6:08 and you're listening to Checkpoint.
Thanks, Katrina. Good evening. I'm Rowan Quinn in for John Campbell on Checkpoint tonight. And returning to our top story now about the letter written to staff today by the Northland DHB Chief Executive Nick Chamberlain. In the 3-page letter, Mr Chamberlain says the DHB is projecting a deficit of more than $7 million and the board won't submit its annual report to the Ministry of Health until it gets more funding. He says the Ministry's population-based funding model is flawed and he believes the DHB has been underfunded by almost $30 million over the past 3 years. Mr Chamberlain said the board had twice written to the Ministry of Health asking for its funding cap to be dropped. So how serious is the situation and is it unique to the Northland DHB? Joining us now is the Health Minister Jonathan Coleman. Good evening, Dr Coleman.
Oh, good evening, Ryan.
Have you spoken to Nick Chamberlain today?
No, I haven't spoken to Nick. I've been campaigning with our candidate in the Waikato electorate and working my own electorate today.
And what is the situation then? He's saying that the board there at the Northland DHB can't submit its annual plan with that forecast deficit. What happens if they don't?
Oh, look, that's not actually correct. I'm a little bit surprised by the letter he sent to staff. But look, we've got deficits for the coming year, 117 million across the district health boards. The Northland DHB has been well managed. Obviously, in all DHBs, they've got to make the money go around. But they can submit their annual plan. But there's always a process of negotiation with the Ministry of Health as we work through these annual plans and signing them off.
Sorry, Dr Coleman, I guess they're saying that they are not going to submit their annual plan. If they don't, what will happen?
Well, that would be unusual. We've never had anyone not submit an annual plan. But look, I'm sure they will, and I'm sure these issues can be worked through. I mean, in that letter, Dr Chamberlain's clearly calling for more money for the DHB. But look, all DHBs would like more money, but there's a very fair formula, the population-based funding formula, which was brought in by the Labor government about 15 years ago, which allocates money fairly across the district health boards. In actual fact, Northland DHB has had the highest average increase, so nearly 5% for each of the last 3 years, so higher average increase than any other DHB over that time frame. So look, money's always tight, but they've had an extra 182 million over the last 8 years. That's 550 million being spent there now. There's 104 more doctors and 131 more nurses in that DHB, and they're also doing an excellent job of producing more specialist appointments, so 2,600 more patients a year seen than 9 years ago. And they're also performing a lot more operations. So, things are improving in terms of service delivery. Obviously, with the 600,000 New Zealanders now eligible for $18 consultations, which we announced on Monday, a huge chunk of those will be in Northland. That's 2.5 million
Dr. Coleman,
now getting either free or very cheap GP consultations. And that'll certainly help in Northland.
Can I just take you back to that figure there of the $117 DHB blowout, really, of deficits? You told John Campbell on August the 11th on this program that the deficits were probably between $50 and $100 million. What's happened since then? Well,
we've had the updated figures. So for this coming year, it looks like it's going to be 117 million. So, that is higher, but, still less than the 160 million of deficits that we inherited. And the bottom line is none of these DHBs will run out of cash. So there's plenty of cash there. Clinical services will not suffer. There is no way services will be cut. They will only continue to increase. And that's the key point. Look, these are balance sheet discussions, but actually services are improving and increasing in every DHB, including Northland.
Can you tell us which DHBs have deficits?
Oh, look, there's a list of them that have deficits. I mean, there's quite a number.
Can you tell me exactly which ones?
I can give you the documentation, but I'm not going to go through it DHB by DHB.
Well, we know Canterbury, the Southern DHB, and the Northland DHB, so that's 3 alone. Any more than that?
Yeah, I mean, there are.
That's about
DHBs.
75 million, I think.
It's well known that Capital and Coast has a deficit of a couple of tens of millions. So the deficit number for this year is 117 million, and we need to work with those DHBs to bring that number down. I mean, Bob Simcock, the chair of Waikato DHB, was on your show an hour ago saying, well, they started with a large deficit. You chip away at it over time. You look at how you can, deal with some of these back office functions, continue to focus on providing the frontline services, and deficits can be increased over time. But there's no way they will be, attacked by cutting services. That is not going to happen. We're only going to continue to improve and increase services like we have during our whole time in government. 50,000 more operations and 150,000 more specialist appointments, 7,000 more doctors and nurses.
Dr. Coleman, just that example you mentioned there, the Waikato DHB, saying that they did have a deficit of $32 million. How have they managed to pull that back? What's been cut?
Well, they haven't cut frontline services, but they've looked at the way the DHB is organised. I mean, you've got to remember that is a huge district health board. I mean, it's one of the largest in the country.
But that's a huge figure as well, $32 million. There must have been some significant cuts somewhere.
No, well, there wasn't, because, I mean, in the last year, they have actually increased their first specialist assessments. So, they're doing 13,000 more a year than they were 9 years ago. They're doing 300 more orthopaedic operations per year, and increasing their electives, so elective surgery, by 6,500 more than 9 years ago, at the same time as reversing a deficit. I mean, this year, the Waikato DHB is actually going to be in surplus. So they've turned that around at the same time as they've produced more of everything. So it shows it can be done, but it's not sudden, drastic measures. It's focusing on where there is costs that can be taken out of the system. And I've got to emphasise, the services will not be cut. You continue to increase and improve access to the services that patients need. And in the end, that's what the public cares about.
Well, Dr. Coleman, Nick Chamberlain from the Northern DHB has said to his staff today that he is worried that they're not going to be able to provide proper services to the people in their community who already are suffering from a lack of services. What is your advice to him? He says there's not enough money.
Actually, I'm a bit surprised that Nick has said that. But look, the Ministry of Health is very prepared to have a discussion with him. I mean, he knows that actually his DHB has had a larger percentage increase than any other DHB each of the 3 years of the last 3 years. They've had an extra nearly 200 million over the last 8 years. And, they're doing an excellent job. They're delivering 2,600 more elective operations and 4,200 more specialist assessments. On top of that, they've got a huge chunk of their population getting free or very cheap GP visits. So it's just incorrect to say they're not getting increased access to services. But look, if Nick is worried about the annual plan, the Ministry of Health is very happy to work with him and his board and staff to work through those issues.
And will you speak to him?
Oh, I won't be speaking to him, no.
Why not?
Oh, look, I deal with the chair, and Nick's talking to his staff, but we're in the middle of a very busy election campaign and dealing with a lot of issues. The best of which actually,
he says,
can I just speak, Ron, for a second? The best of which is the announcement today of the $6.5 million for cochlear implants, which is going to save the hearing of a 22-year-old lifesaver and clear a waiting list. So, I'm focusing on increasing and improving access to services, but Nick knows the process for dealing with this, and I'm sure the Ministry of Health will be very happy to work through the annual plan with him.
Thank you for your time. That is the Minister of Health, Jonathan Coleman there. Well, the National Party is facing questions about its campaign slogan making an appearance at yesterday's pre-election fiscal update at Treasury. The leader, Bill English, says the State Services Commission will investigate whether it was appropriate to use a party slogan for government business. He also fielded further questions about New Zealand's continued involvement in Afghanistan. Here's our political reporter, Demelza Leslie.
Delivering for New Zealanders is the official National Party campaign slogan and featured in the Finance Minister's pre-election slideshow briefing at Treasury. State Services Commission rules require government departments to stay clear of party politics in the run-up to the election. Bill English says the pre-election update was a follow-up to the May budget, which also featured the slogan.
Delivering for New Zealanders was the tagline of the 2017 budget. So it's right through the budget material, which was certainly a government announcement. So the preview is essentially a budget process, and the Treasury run it. and it looks like the budget material. So the SSC can have a look at it. Quite happy to take their advice.
Bill English was also asked about what information he'll give to Labor about a request to send 2 more non-combat military personnel to Afghanistan. Mr English says the Cabinet has already made the decision and he's quite happy to share those details with Labor's leader.
As requested, we'll make the information available. But I can assure them and everyone else that it involves non-combat.
But Bill English sounded a note of caution about Jacinda Ardern's lack of foreign affairs experience.
I think it's important that New Zealand maintains a fairly bipartisan presentation of itself to the world as an honest broker, a bit independent, cutting her own path and making her own decisions.
Ms Ardern doesn't think she lacks experience in this area.
I spent 6 years presiding or being involved with one of the largest political international youth organisations in the world with consultative status with the UN. Many of the individuals I worked with in that capacity now hold senior roles in their respective governments. I actually see that as a strength for me.
The Labour leader spent her 4th day of the campaign in Auckland, first making school lunches at Salvation Army before distributing them to pupils at Rongamai School in Otara.
I really like nachos. That's why I'm so sad I missed yesterday. How great was Nachos Day? Yeah! Was it the best? Yeah! Oh, there you go. There's some customer feedback, Laurie.
Jacinda Ardern was asked by the school children what she would do if she won the competition that is the election.
Ah, that's a good question. If I won the competition to see who gets to be in charge, what would I do? I would do a lot of things to make sure that every kid in New Zealand had the best chance possible to do anything that they want.
Bill English's day was quite different. Out in the sunshine in Christchurch, he officially laid a foundation stone for the development of a new 5-star hotel in the central city.
This is going to build commercial confidence, attract more tourists and bring jobs and families back to this part of the city. Then thank you very much.
Joy and Morgan Lowe, who live next door to the hotel site, spoke to Mr English after the launch, saying they were excited about the Christchurch rebuild. They told him how his predecessor, John Campbell, helped them through hard times when they lived behind the cordon in the weeks after the devastating earthquake of 2011.
I think the thing that always stuck in my mind was the morning after the earthquake was John Campbell saying, "You are not alone." Yeah. And that's something that really made things feel better.
Bill English made a small policy announcement today that National would put a further $120 million towards building a new multi-use stadium in Christchurch. He says he envisages it would be similar to the one in Dunedin with a full retractable roof. In Christchurch for Checkpoint, Demelza Leslie.
Auckland Council will not allow more shops to open on Easter Sunday. Councillors overwhelmingly voted in favour of the status quo at a meeting this morning, where a 2,000-strong petition calling for no change was presented. The move's been praised by unions and retail workers, but as Todd Nile reports, the council's also pretty unhappy it's the one that had to make the decision in the first place.
Accompanied by a giant bunny handing out Easter eggs, church groups, retail workers and union staff picketed councillors as they entered the town hall to cast their vote. Albert Masagnai, who works at the warehouse, said even though workers can legally refuse to work on Easter Sunday, they feel pressured to do so.
It's really important that we preserve a time for the family. You know, every year there's only 3.5 days allocated for the family.
Before the vote, the Mayor Phil Goff left no doubt about where he stood on the issue, saying allowing shops to open on Easter Sunday would be the thin end of the wedge.
And make no mistake, if it's Easter Sunday now that becomes commercialised, the next step will be Good Friday, because the same arguments will apply, maybe Christmas Day and even conceivably Anzac Day.
A council analysis found allowing shops to open would have little impact on the region's economy. And while a survey found 55% of people did want more shops open, Manukau Ward Councillor Whaanana Efeso Collins said 80% of his constituents in South Auckland opposed it. He presented a 2,000-strong signature petition calling for the status quo to be kept in order to protect vulnerable workers, and delivered this reminder of what was at stake.
On Easter Sunday, my family wake up, and we usually get up in time for church, but we'll gather around our breakfast table. We'll hold hands around that table, about to have our breakfast, about to have our Weet-Bix, and my daughter will pray, and she'll say, "Thank you, Lord, that we're able to have family time. Thank you that I can chill out." That's the kind of language, hey? How about that for new kinds of prayers? That I can chill out with mum and daddy-o.
Efeso Collins' sentiments were echoed around the debating chamber, with only one councillor, Desley Simpson, voting in favour of relaxing Easter Sunday trading.
I believe that the status quo is a little bit archaic, outdated and unfair. I think we need to promote business, and we need to also support our visitor strategy. People who work on a public day can have another day off in lieu.
First Union's Retail Secretary Maxine Gay says she's delighted the status quo will remain in Auckland.
This is a really great outcome for them, so that they have some certainty and are able to plan for next Easter, knowing full well they cannot be compelled to work.
The council also voted to voice its disapproval of the government's decision a year ago to put the Easter Sunday shop trading policy in the hands of local councils. Phil Goff was particularly aggrieved.
I think during my time in Parliament, it came before Parliament 11 times, and on each occasion Parliament failed to be able to resolve this issue, and courageously they've now passed it to us, which might be described as a hospital pass.
The Auckland Council can change its mind in the future, with some councillors floating the idea of getting more analysis on allowing just the city centre to trade on Easter Sunday. I Tamaki Makoro mo te hotaka o te ahiahi, ko Todd Nile tēnei.
A groundbreaking report on sexual violence among students has found many victims don't understand what they've suffered is actually abuse. The In Our Own Words report, released today by the New Zealand Union of Students' Associations, will form the basis for a 3-year $1.4 million action plan to prevent and respond to sexual violence within the country's institutes of higher learning. Ruth Hill was at Victoria University for the launch.
It's lunchtime, and here on campus hundreds of students are taking a break from their books to grab a bite to eat. We're asking them whether they think sexual violence is a problem for students.
I'm honestly a little bit disheartened by it myself, although I'm not a victim of it, to know people that are.
Obviously, if you're going to come on to someone, there's a boundary before it gets kind of creepy and uncomfortable. So I think if there was like more education around that, and just more of an emphasis that like if something is weird or you do feel uncomfortable, that it is okay to speak out about it.
I'm not aware of its prevalence, but I do think it's an important issue.
Some people have their own problems and they like to come and harass or even attack people because they're jealous of who these people are.
The study is based on an opt-in online survey involving 1,400 students from across the country. Of those who answered the question about whether they thought sexual violence was a problem for students, over half, 53%, had suffered sexual violence themselves. Its author, Izzy O'Neill, the national coordinator of anti-sexual violence campaign Thursdays in Black, says 9% of those who answered the question on sexual assault said they had been raped, but 19% said they had had sex without their consent, which is of course rape.
That difference shows that we don't have enough education about non-consensual sex. What does it mean in terms of it actually being rape and it being assault?
Ms O'Neill says most people were assaulted by someone they were dating or had previously dated, which could have made it difficult for them to accept it was abuse. Māori research consultant Gina Rose Astwood says the study shows tertiary institutions are not immune to the entrenched culture of sexual violence and victim blaming, which plagues communities across New Zealand.
A lot of people actually blame themselves for their encounters, and what that did, it actually created a depression and an anxiety within themselves that affected them in their tertiary schooling.
Gender Minorities Aotearoa Adeline Gregg, who helped develop the survey, says the project is particularly important to her as someone who was forced to drop out of Victoria University because of sexual harassment.
For me, one of the important things to address is the fact that the sexual abuse is a barrier to even attending in an institution like this and getting that education in the first place. And it's, again, part of that lack of the primary education on sexual consent, which includes our bodies and the specific challenges that we face as trans people.
Her colleague, Ahi Wihongi, is sad but not surprised to read in the report that 100% of trans women in Takatapui, Māori who identify with diverse genders and sexualities, have suffered sexual harassment during their tertiary education. Ahi says while most sexual abuse and assaults are carried out by students on each other, university staff need to be more sensitive about the way they talk about trans people and other genders and sexual minorities.
It has an impact on people's access to the tertiary institutions, and it also has an impact on the tertiary institutions and their makeup. If it's not a welcoming environment for, say, transgender people, then the university itself misses out on having transgender students. So it's really important from all perspectives.
ACC is giving the Students' Associations $1.4 million over the next 3 years to support an action plan on sexual violence. The agency's Violence Injury Prevention Manager, Mike McCarthy, says 22% of new sensitive claims in the last financial year were from those aged 18 to 24, the age of most tertiary students. Last year, ACC paid out $103 million on treatment and entitlements for sensitive claims, which is another good reason to prevent sexual abuse in the first place.
It requires the buy-in from institutions, it requires the student voice to be heard, it requires for all of us who have an opportunity to influence and be involved in it to work collaboratively, to work together to build what we want cohesively. What's really important to acknowledge is that nobody can do this on their own.
The ACC money will fund reviews of tertiary education institution policies on sexual harassment and sexual violence prevention, enhance reporting systems and support for students, training and education programs for all staff and students. For Checkpoint, Ruth Hill.
And that's Checkpoint for this evening. Thanks for joining us on your radio, your television, online, or however you chose to connect with us today. You can hear highlights in late edition at 10:15 this evening, or any of our stories tonight on rnz.co.nz/checkpoint. So from me, Rowan Quinn, and all of the Checkpoint team, have a lovely night.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. The Northland District Health Board is refusing to submit its annual plan to the Ministry of Health unless it gets more funding. The National Party is facing questions about its campaign slogan making an appearance at yesterday's pre-election fiscal update at Treasury. The Māori Party says comments by TVNZ's Mike Hosking about the Māori role have caused irreparable damage to its campaign. Two men who helped a drug syndicate to bring 35 kilograms of cocaine into the country had buyers lined up for the Class A drug. They've been jailed for just under 20 and 18 years respectively. Judges at the Australian High Court have postponed hearings into whether senior ministers can hold office when they're also citizens of other countries, including New Zealand. Young people in Dunedin are being urged to get the MMR vaccine if they don't know if they're fully immunised against mumps. And a house has been